welcome to Spirit and Roots. My name is Dan Razza, and this is a show dedicated to the best songs and songwriters from yesterday and today. Each episode we talk to a special guest about their musical journey and ask them to share with us what it means to be an artist and make music. And we are so lucky to have as our guest tonight, David Knopfler. David was a founder member of Dire Straits, with whom he achieved double platinum success before leaving the group to launch a highly successful solo career. His latest album, The Fantastic Songs of Loss and Love, has just been released, and we are going to be talking and spinning songs from that over the next hour, as well, of course, as exploring David's musical journey and his approach to songwriting. But before we dive into our interview, let's hear David in action with one of my favourite tracks of his. This is That Perfect Storm, taken from his 2019 album, Last Train Leaving.
Oh, I think to myself, there's a bad storm rising in this crazy world, and I think to myself, I'll soon be smiling, safe in the arms of my loving girl. Now I know, with the bad storm rising in this wicked world, and I think my love will soon be smiling, safe in the arms of my loving girl. Under gods of fire, under gods of war, you can feel it rising, that perfect storm. Under gods of thunder and under gods of war, could you feel it rising once more? That perfect storm, that perfect storm. Under wings of fire, under gods of war, could you feel it rising, that perfect storm? Under gods of thunder, under gods of war, could you feel it rising once more? That perfect storm, that perfect storm.
We just heard That Perfect Storm by our guest David Knopfler, who joins us on the telephone now. David, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm good. Never better, thanks.
It's great speaking to you. Tell us whereabouts in the world you are right now.
Down on the southwest of England at the moment. We were living in America for a while, for a few years, but off and on. But we're now settled here.
Lovely. So what is that, kind of Somerset area?
Keep going, yeah.
Keep going, a bit further west.
Keep going down.
Lovely. Yeah, that seems a nice part of the world to be in. Well, as good a part of the world as any to be in while there's horrible pandemics going on. Is that right?
Yeah, I'd rather be here than in a city, that's for sure. So I was just looking up That Perfect Storm to see what album it's on. It is on Last Train Leaving.
I'm just taking the cellophane off to try and find out what the lyrics were about, because I can't remember.
It's a cracking album, that Last Train Leaving, and that track in particular stands out to me. It's a real special one.
Thank you.
Yeah, a real special one. The first time and the last time, I have to say, I saw you perform was at the Globe Theatre here in London. Do you remember that concert?
I do very well. We had a spot there, 3 songs, Harry and I gave one of my songs to Corinne Polwart to do.
That's right.
Yeah, it was a fun concert. It was for Reprieve.
That's right. You were on a bill with Steve Earle, the Proclaimers.
That's correct.
Alison
Yeah,
Moore.
it was a good lineup. What they call a benefit.
That's right. Yeah, it was a benefit.
How much benefit it was to those poor buggers over in Guantanamo, I don't know, but there we go.
That's right, because I think it was around 2006 or something like that, so it would have been that time, wouldn't it? Yeah, where all that stuff was
kicking off.
Indeed. I still don't know if Guantanamo's... I know Obama pledged to close it.
Yeah, there's about 45 inmates still there, been there 15 years.
Wow.
Never charged with anything. Never charged.
That is insane. Wow. Well, yeah, that was the first time I saw you, and I just remember that. I was so impressed, the songs were fantastic. You were playing in a real stripped-back setting, like you say, with your guitarist, Harry.
Just 2 acoustic guitars, yeah.
That's right.
Very simple. Harry and I have been playing as a duo. Well, we sometimes play with a big lineup, but we've been playing as a duo for almost 2 decades now. Wow. We were kind of ahead of the curve in terms of stripping things down and making it economical to go out and tour. I mean, the reality of touring in the old days, if you go back to the 70s and 80s, was it couldn't be done without tour support from a record company.
Wow. Yeah, it's a different world now, isn't it?
It certainly is. Unrecognisable. I wrote the Bluffer's Guide to Rock Music in the mid-90s, I would say, and nothing in it's relevant anymore. I mean, nothing. The whole industry's changed beyond recognition.
Yeah. I picked up books like that over the years, like How to Make It in the Music Business, and you're right. From the millennium onwards, pretty much, it's kind of been rapidly changing, isn't it? That whole landscape.
Even by the late 90s, record companies were telling artists to go out and get be able to fill 1,000-seater venues before they were even interested.
It's insane.
It reached the point really where the artist had got to such a point that they no longer need a record company. Mm-hmm. Ergo, what's the point in having one?
Exactly. Talking of which, you've just released this great new album, Songs of Loss and Love, and that comes out on your own label, right? Tell us about that, David.
Well, they've been coming out on my own label since just what I was talking about a minute ago, that there's really no advantage anymore to having a label. All they're going to do really is take a share of your live profit. But of course, the live work situation is also changed for the worse. I've occasionally gone with major labels and sometimes with independent labels over the years in different territories.
Yeah.
But since the internet, really, it's really not been worth it. So I'd say I think the last album to be on a major label was probably Wishbones, which was CD8. And this is CD19, I think.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah,
there's really not much point. I mean, if the only place you're selling your CDs is a few over the internet and a few at your gigs, why would you need a label for that? What a label used to be good for was getting the records out to wholesalers and to retailers and to all the kind of markets that simply aren't there anymore.
Yeah, I guess you've already built up enough of a following and a fan base that, like you say, what are they really doing apart from taking away a cut of your money, which you need right now?
Yeah, it's just kind of the margins used to be much wider.
Yeah.
But, first we cut out the managers because that was 20%. Then we cut out the publishers, and then we cut out this, and then we cut out that. And before you know it, you're a one-man band banging a bass drum, with your foot while you play the guitar with your teeth or something. It's just, it's not an industry as such anymore, really. It's more of an obsession or an illness.
It's funny you talk about the drum actually and banging the drum metaphorically, but actually, literally speaking, I was surprised because I was listening to the new record, Songs of Loss and Love, and I was like, man, who is this? Like, who's playing the drums and percussion on this album? 'Cause they've got a really nice feel. They're kind of like really like sensitive. And
it was me.
It was you, wasn't it?
I started out on drums when I was 11. It's my first instrument, professional instrument, was a drum kit, which my dad bought for me when I was about 11, I think.
There you go.
And I played the guitar in parallel with the drums till I was about 15 or 16. But I was then in a band with a guitarist who was a worse player than me. So I switched to the guitar, and I wasn't getting very far with the drums. I was still kind of Dave Clark 5, you know. I'd never really learned how to tune them or play them well. I could hold down a kind of a beat Ringo Starr style, but I couldn't play with any finesse. And it didn't look like it was going to happen. And, you know, in those days, you couldn't get tuition. You sank or swam, and that was it. And the drums were really clearly not going to be my major instrument. And I was playing piano at home, playing guitar. So, yeah, I mean, I can get by on a lot of things. I'm not a drummer. Give me a real drummer any day of the week.
Yeah.
If you're just looking for something subtle to complement a track that's going from A to Z anyway, then I can get by.
Yeah. And tell me, was this record written and recorded during the pandemic, or were there songs
Yes.
Okay, it was. Okay.
I would say most of it was written. I don't know. Perhaps a lot of them would have been written before the pandemic, but they were certainly recorded. Some of them would have been recorded or mixed during it. It's hard to say. I've been effectively in isolation for 3 or 4 years. I mean, it's not. When the touring stopped, the last tour stopped, then there was a long hiatus, and we had a tour planned that would have started in March 2020 that didn't because of the pandemic. So I've been off duty, so to speak, for about 3 years now.
Wow.
And all I've been doing is really recording in the studio all that time. The major difference for me with the pandemic, before and after, is going to the shops and taking the odd trip out for a cup of tea somewhere. But for the most part, I'm working from home anyway. And once you're in the studio, you're in the studio. And I like being in the studio, so it's not that big a deal for me.
Yeah, that is very much a kind of splendid isolation kind of place to be, isn't it, in the studio recording?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, let's hear something from this new record, David. What track shall we spin?
This isn't Kansas anymore, seems like a likely candidate. It's long, I should warn you, but it's got some content.
We like long when it's excellent, so that suits us well. Do you remember writing this song and what inspired it?
I do. Yeah, I got a very rough little MP3 from Hal Lindus, who was my replacement in Dire Straits, of a guitar idea that he'd written.
Yeah.
Just a lick, the basic guitar lick that opens the track in the first few bars. That is actually Hal's scratchy little MP3 idea, which he'd never intended to be used as a recording. So I just took that idea and put it into Logic, into the professional spec. And that gave me my starting point, and I pretty much wrote the whole song around that idea musically. And then lyrically, I just added what took my, ideas that took my fancy, that were basically, I think I was obviously the back of my mind the entire time for this song was Trump and the damage he was doing to American democracy, which turned out to be almost a success for him. So yeah, was quite prescient in a way.
Yeah, there's a lot of power in that track. And you mentioned is that how you usually work? Do you collaborate?
Hal and I have met several times, and we get together. If he's in England or I'm in America, we've got together off and on, and we've been mates all these years, despite never actually having played in Dire Straits together at the same time. Hal stepped into my shoes when I left, and he was the only one who was very generous about that, saying things like, well, they were big shoes to step into and things like that. That was nice. He was kind and generous, as he always is about everybody, actually. And so Hal and I became mates, and this is the first time we've been intending to collaborate on something for years, and this is the first time it actually happened. So this is a co-write with Hal.
I love that. It was a cracking song. Let's hear this. This is David Knopfler with This Isn't Kansas Anymore, taken from his new album, Songs of Loss and Love.
This isn't Kansas anymore. Hard times, hard times. The tsunami's at the shore. This isn't Kansas anymore. Hard time, hard time. There are bloodstains on the floor. This isn't Kansas anymore. Hard time. Added to the score, added to the score. This isn't Kansas anymore. This isn't Kansas anymore. Anymore. It's getting harder to ignore. There's nothing left now to explore. Cries in winter skies, and we've been down this road before. Hard times, oh, hard times, with winter at the door. This isn't Kansas anymore. Hard time. This isn't Kansas anymore. Rats are in the grain, there's nothing in the store. Troops are on the streets, the politicians with their wolves. Hard times, the wolf is at the door. This isn't Kansas anymore. comes down. Lone girl cries. This isn't Kansas anymore. It never rains now, but it pours.
You're listening to Spirit and Roots, and we just heard our guest David Knopfler with This Isn't Kansas Anymore, taken from his new record, Songs of Loss and Love. So I was wondering, David, what's it been like promoting and releasing a new album during a global pandemic like we find ourselves in now?
It's more difficult, obviously, yeah. I mean, the only way that you could... There's only one mechanism for selling CDs at the moment, for me anyway, and that's via the internet and via my own Paris Records website. So if people don't order there, then they don't get. And there simply isn't there aren't enough sales to warrant spending money on marketing and advertising. There just isn't a budget for it anymore.
No, and we touched on that a little bit, like how different the musical landscape is these days, with the rise of music streaming, piracy also cutting away at record sales.
And added to all that is my own idiosyncratic way of working, which is that I've basically abandoned any interest in making what might be called commercial music. I'm not trying to write a hit, and I haven't tried to write a hit since about 1985. So going my own sweet way and making my own work as I feel like it, regardless of consequence, has a price to pay commercially, obviously. My first 5 albums, I had an eye to the market and to keeping the record companies sweet. I would try and make singles so that the record companies would want to sign me up for a deal and pay me a fat advance. But by CD6, I'd really had enough of that, and I was starting just to make my records the way that I felt I wanted to, with the vibe. And trying to get this honesty thing going. I really wanted to make records that felt more connected emotionally and spiritually to what I'm up to and what I'm feeling, and to make an artist's album. And that involves inevitably a certain element of handmadeness about it that you don't get when you work with clicks and computers and, everything very processed. So I'm always looking for that organic vibe as much as I can get it, a real honest thing. And that doesn't necessarily lend itself to mainstream radio very easily.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And also, like we were saying before, about the length of tracks as well.
Sure. Back in the day, anything more than... how Sultan's ever made it, I do not know. I think they took one verse out for the single, which got it down to about 5 minutes. But it was 6, and then, in those days, 3 minutes was considered... And television was the same. If you couldn't get your song down to 3 minutes, they wouldn't give you a TV spot. They would just savagely cut the thing in half if necessary, to hell with the verses or what the song was about, And it was just a reality. You either liked it or you lumped it, and there was no flexibility. And they wouldn't even warn you sometimes. You'd be up there on stage performing, and the lights on the cameras would just turn off, and that was it. They played you out, You had your 3 minutes. Sorry, you're gone.
That's awful. I remember one time seeing the great Jimmy Cliff, the reggae artist, play a concert in Finsbury Park, and you know what these all-day festivals are like. It overran.
Sure.
He was headlining, and about 20 minutes into his set, he got cut off mid-song, and it was just horrendous seeing it happen.
Council regulations, yeah.
Yeah, I hate it when that happens. It's brutal.
There's no excuse for these festivals running over. I mean, they do need to religiously take people off when their time's up. There are so many people who are given 30 minutes and will steal an hour if they're allowed to.
And it's always the people at the top who pay, the headline artists.
And in the end, the headline artist, Jimi Hendrix, goes on at 4 a.m. or something. It's absolutely ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. God. Well, without bringing the tone of the interview down too negative, we talked about how the music industry's changed, and we talked about music streaming and piracy. And I did want to touch briefly on Brexit, because I know Europe has been one of your main touring markets. And I just wondered, for those people listening, because you know, we take it for granted being musicians that everybody understands this, but can you tell people listening how exactly will Britain's decision to leave the European Union affect independent musicians like you?
It's going to affect them all pretty badly. For example, someone calls me up, let's say, from Germany and offers me a TV show or offers me a one-off concert, me and Harry, my guitarist, Harry Bogdanos. We can get on a plane as things stand with one guitar each, fly over to wherever that concert is, anywhere in the 27 countries within the EU, do the concert, fly home, no questions asked, nobody asks you about your guitar, nobody asks about what's in your suitcase. It's the same as doing a gig in Scotland or doing a gig in 20 minutes down the road, effectively. The only difference is you would travel there by an aeroplane. But that's completely different now. Everything's different. There are border and custom controls now everywhere on everything. And there are going to be visas required if you want to work in those countries, which are expensive to create. If I wanted to tour in America, even 10 years ago, the cost of a visa for America is £1,500 per person. So you imagine a band, 6-piece band. I mean, even Harry and I, it was $3,000 out of your budget before you've even left London. And you've got to spend a day at the embassy to pick up those visas if they're kind enough to give you one. Yeah. Very makes forward planning almost impossible. And then you've got, let's say you arrive at a border and then they say, well, are you carrying any merchandise? Then they can take your van apart. You know, if you've got equipment, and they can stop you at the border for as long as they need or want to be satisfied that you're not smuggling anything. And then you need a carnet, which is hundreds of pounds again. A carnet is a list of all the equipment you're carrying. And if one thing on that carnet is wrong or not quite right, you know, let's say you've got the wrong registration number of an amp, or the amp breaks and you've bought another one, you know, and the carnet is no longer accurate. I mean, the smallest of things, all this administration at the top level of touring, these things are all manageable. They're extra costs, but the profits for a stadium band is fine. But for an artist like myself playing to 400 people, no. I mean, it just doesn't work. It makes a difference between having a commercially successful, viable business that makes a profit to having a loss-making business. And by the time you've added all that up, the tour simply isn't worth doing anymore. And if the tour's not worth doing, then you're not earning the money. If you're not earning the money, this is the bigger issue that the government don't seem to understand. If we are not earning the money, we're not paying the tax to them.
Yeah.
The exchequer is going to, and which means everybody suffers, the exchequer is going to be billions of pounds out of pocket from the creative arts, not generating the income they used to, because they've got all these additional costs and hassle to deal with. And what is the point of all this extra bureaucracy? What did it actually achieve?
Yeah.
Freedom of movement's a two-way street. And it's all very well for the government to say to us, well, because of freedom of movement, we've stopped it. But then to say it's the EU's fault that musicians can't go to Europe is absurd. It's an absolute absurd. It's a ridiculous line they've drawn in the sand for themselves. They said because of our rules, Europe is no longer complying with what we want. Well, you can't leave a club and then complain that you don't get the same benefits you had when you were a member. I could talk about this for hours, though. You know, it's a stupidity. The whole thing's idiotic. And it's not just musicians. Musicians are just one aspect of various kinds of lunacies that this in complications. I'm not saying it can't eventually be sorted out. But my God, it's a very high price to pay for what seems like a vanishingly small return.
I agree. And I guess you're right, it affects many industries, not just musicians, but just focusing back on musicians again, like in an era now where record sales don't amount to much because of piracy, because of streaming. Artists need to tour. You know, independent working artists need to tour to make money.
The only profitable area left is touring. You're absolutely correct.
So if America's so prohibitive, if you can get the visa, but then to pay, like you say, $1,500 plus all the travel fees involved, crisscrossing America, makes it very unlikely to fill that gap, doesn't it?
Well, my last tour of America involved more flights than there were gigs. I think I did 18 shows and 22 flights. You know what I mean?
And they're expensive internal flights, right?
Yeah, it's Crazy Heart. You know the movie. I mean, you're flying up and down, zigzagging up and down the country with a carbon footprint the size of a Yeti. You know, just to get around the whole thing. So you compare that to a streamlined tour across, say, 6 or 7 countries in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
There's no comparison. I mean, you can basically work your way around Europe without any problems.
Yeah. Yeah, it's made things very difficult. If you were starting out again now as a musician,
right?
Do you think you would have still chosen to go into the music business given the challenges facing UK musicians that we've just spoken about?
I think when you love what you do, it's very hard to not do it. But certainly there's a lot more challenges now. It's a lot harder. It's very hard to see it as a viable business. But people will still do it for the love of it, I think.
You're right. You're right. My goodness. Well, listen, let's play another track from the album, and I'm going to pick one out if that's all right. I'd love to spin
Sure.
The Sun's Going Down. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, it started out with the Andy Pandy theme tune, which goes way back to my childhood. Only those of my age and will remember that we had a little program on television called Watch with Mother. And Andy Pandy was my favourite when I was about 2 or 3.
Wow.
And so that was the start of it. I got that idea, and one thing led to another until the song wrote itself. And so I started out with that in the first few bars, and then it branched off into its own direction. And it goes on quite a trajectory.
Yeah.
So it's a mixture of sort of nursery rhyme nostalgia with some rather bitter political realities, all combined into one song. And I had to actually approach BMG and get permission to use the opening bars, because it is the Andy Pandy theme.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. And they approved it, obviously.
They gave me approval, and I gave them the credit on the record accordingly. Yeah. One of my unexpected co-writes, but it's there.
Yeah.
I was half tempted just to say, "Oh, screw it, they're not going to care." But I thought, no, let's do it right.
Yeah, I'm glad it all worked out. And there's a reference to Boris Johnson, of course, in this.
I didn't say that.
Is that not right? I thought Bojo was Mr. Johnson.
Well, you may say that. I couldn't possibly comment.
Forgive me. Okay, well, you know what? It could be anyone, yeah.
Make up your own mind when you listen to the track.
Well, it's a track that resonates a lot with me right now, that's for sure. You're listening to Spirit and Roots, and this is our guest, David Knopfler, with The Sun's Going Down.
Time to go home, time to go home, and he said goodbye, and he said goodbye. Oh, possession, they say, is 9/10 of the law. You want it so bad, you want so much more, but you can't recall what you wanted it for. The sun's going over the bay, the sun's going down on the day, on the day. The sun's going down over Buckingham Palace. Christopher Robin, he showed up with Alice. He knew it was wrong, it was more than just callous. The sun's going over the bay, the sun's going down on the day, on the day. Possession, they say, is 9/10 of the law. Your friendship got broke, you settled a score. You wanted so bad and you want so much more. Now the world's getting smaller each day, with the sun going down on the bay, on the bay. Oh, the sun's going down over Buckingham Palace. Christopher Robin, he went down with palace. You knew it was wrong, more than just careless, like somebody got in your way. The sun's going down on the bay, on the bay. Oh, the sun's going down, the moon's coming round, like everything's going your way. With a will to believe in this All Hallows Eve, come the faithful for All Hallows Day. Possession, they say, is 9/10 of the law. You wanted it all, even more than before. Now you've got it bad and you don't know the score. They're changing the guard and it all feels too hard. The sun's going over the bay. The sun's going down on the day. At half-mast over Buckingham Palace, Christopher Robin, he showed up with Alice, wearing only his frown. It's Bojo the clown. The sun's going down on the day. The sun's going over the bay.
You're listening to Spirit and Roots, and we just heard our guest David Knopfler with The Sun's Going Down, taken from his new record, Songs of Loss and Love. So, did you say this is your 19th record of your career, David?
It's my 18th. Because there was no CD 13.
Is that
so,
right?
On my numbering system, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So I'm working on CD 20 at the moment, which is a best of, and then CD 21, which is really going to be my 20th CD, will be out in another 6 months or so.
Wow. So correct me if you disagree, but you seem someone who's pretty prolific. Do you write every day?
Yeah, pretty much. And the other thing, I mean, as you get to my age, when you're in the foothills of 68, foothills of 70 coming up in a couple of years, you really feel that you've only got so much limited time left, and there's still feels like there's a lot to get done. And I'd like to do it while I've still got ears, and while I still feel like I'm able to, because who knows for how much longer. An awful lot of artists, it seems to me, peak quite young, and then their records get more and more sporadic and less interesting.
Yeah.
It's like they've said everything, and the same happens with authors. They've said everything they want to say, and I think I'm a late developer. I feel like I'm still very much in the thick of it in terms of songwriting.
Yeah,
I don't know whether I still have the same. Obviously, you don't deliver at the same intensity as you do when you're young. The energy levels of a young person's record are obviously higher. But that doesn't devalue the work that you're making in your older years. You'll see that with artists who paint. That they'll have, they often talk about artists as having 3 periods, young, medium, and old. And you'll see it with, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with the different periods. They're just different.
Yeah. And
everyone will have their favourites. I happen to prefer Picasso before he went Cubist, but that doesn't mean to say that he's that his older work is worthless. And it's often the case that with artists, the work that has lasting merit is their younger work. But I think in my case, I'd like to think that's not the case. So I still feel very driven to make the work. And it's as long as I'm driven, I will listen to it and react accordingly and get the work done. I mean, what slowed me up in the earlier days was really record companies, and the difficulties involved in dealing with them and getting deals and chasing deals and getting them to pay for things. Because in those days, you needed $100,000 to make a record. And so, you had to hustle around, do a lot of business to get to the point where you could make it. It was a bit like making movies, you needed a budget before you could move. So records would be held up by the hustle.
Yeah.
But when you're making your own records, and the technology now is so much better than it used to be, there's no reason to slow down. There's no reason to wait. And I'm signed up with this thing called Patreon.
Yeah, tell us about that.
And so the patrons themselves contribute every month to the budget. And so I feel under an obligation to give them a song or two every month. So the format's changed in a sense. You're making work for fewer people, but you're getting paid more for it.
Yeah.
And the idea kind of works. And so I have this lovely two-way street between me and them, where I can discuss a problem I'm having in the recording. I might say, what do you think of this pedal steel guitar on this intro? Would you prefer it with or do you prefer it without? Here's the two versions. And I'll get feedback instantly. The same thing that you would normally get from a studio working with people.
Yeah.
You get that feedback all the time, and that's useful and it's nice. And you're not making the record really in quite such a solitary way as you would be without them.
Yeah.
So I like it. It suits me.